morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Clemson. It's good to be here with you. My name is Karl, and I am your worship associate this morning. Here at UUFC, we welcome all those who come seeking a spiritual home among us, whether this is your 100th time here or your first. If you happen to be a first-time visitor, we would love to get to know you. If you are here in person, please be sure to visit our welcome table right outside the sanctuary and stay for conversation after the service during our social hour. If you're at a home and are viewing us online, we would be happy for you to receive our newsletter by emailing the office or visiting our website at uufc.org so that you can learn more about us. Do we have any visitors this morning who would like to? And she's a kayaker. Do we have any other visitors? I have a few announcements, and there are more on the back of your order of service. The UU Congregation of Atlanta is hosting the second annual Soul UUL Summit, March 27th through the 30th. This is an opportunity to gather with other UUs in the region for special workshops, social events, and connection. For more information, look for Reverend Holly's message in Thursday's weekly connection. UUFC has formed a solar project team to support our fellowship's climate justice efforts. More details about the project and funding drive will be shared starting in March. If you have questions or want to be involved, please reach out to Dave Sanders.
Thank you, Karl. I would like to also extend you all a warm welcome. I am the Reverend Holly Brown. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the settled minister here at UUFC. I have some opening words this morning that I would like to share with you, but I want to give you a little bit of context where they come from. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, a Black woman with membership in both the African Methodist, Episcopal, and Unitarian churches in Philadelphia, shared these words in 1866 at the Women's National Rights Convention. And she stated, "We are all bound up together in a great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving a curse on its own soul." This bundle of humanity is not unfamiliar to us. You might have heard it as, the interdependent web, our interdependence with one another. And in this spirit of interdependence, we enter into worship this morning and each Sunday. And in the spirit of worshiping together, I invite you to rise in body, mind, or spirit, wherever you are, to join in singing number 95, There's More Love Somewhere. And I want to mention that we always have slides, but sometimes, if you look in the hymnal, you can see where spaces are, where breaths might be, and that can sometimes help us follow along with unfamiliar songs, although this one should be a little bit more familiar and easier to follow along with. Thanks.
Alia, would you like to light the chalice for us? Thank you. Please join me in saying our affirmation. We gather together in a spirit of love, with justice as our guide. This is our chosen covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth with freedom, and to care for one another.
How many of you have ever heard of Lewis Latimer? No? Yeah. Well, Lewis Latimer was an African-American inventor and a Unitarian. And we tell his story in one of our children's spirit play lessons on UU Heroes and Heroines. And this morning, I'd like to share a little bit more of his story with you, which I kind of cobbled together from that spirit play lesson and biographies and historical material. Lewis Latimer was born in 1848 in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Although Lewis and his three siblings were born free, their parents, George and Rebecca, had been born into slavery in Virginia. When Rebecca was pregnant with their first child, the couple fled Virginia via the Underground Railroad and made their way to Boston. The owners of both George and Rebecca put ads in the newspaper, and this is the actual ads right here, offering rewards for the return of these people that they considered to be their property. Unfortunately, in 1842, George Latimer was spotted by a former employee of his enslaver who then came to Boston and had George arrested. Although William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass both defended George Latimer, the judge ruled in favor of his enslaver and ordered his return to Virginia. Only an offer from a local minister to purchase George for $400 saved him from a return to slavery. George Latimer's case made him a hero to abolitionists across the country. The Latimer Journal, which you can see a copy of there, an abolitionist newspaper, was started in his honor. And the 1843 Massachusetts law, Personal Liberty Act, which prohibited Massachusetts government officials from helping to detain fugitive slaves and mandated that state facilities could not be used for such purposes, was known as the Latimer Law. So Lewis Latimer had strong associations with the abolitionist movement from the moment of his birth. But despite all of that attention, Lewis's family remained poor, and Lewis was largely self-educated. He was 12 when the Civil War came, but at the age of 15, he joined the Union Navy. After the war, Lewis moved to Boston and took a job as a clerk at a patent lawyer's office, and that's the office. Go ahead. Yeah, that's the office building right there. The Crosby and Gould office was above the Boston 5-cent saving bank. Imagine that, 5 cents? There he watched other employees as they drew the detailed drawings needed to go along with the patent applications. And Lewis thought to himself, I can do that. So he bought himself a compass and other drafting tools and started to draw. When his employers saw his work, they offered him a position as a draftsman. One day, a teacher came into the office looking for someone to help him draw up a patent application as soon as possible before a competitor could. Lewis did the drawings for the patent, which was submitted just hours in time before the competitor submitted theirs. That teacher's name was Alexander Graham Bell, and the patent was for the first telephone. In 1880, Lewis Latimer moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and began working for the U.S. Electric Lighting Company. His boss, Hiram Maxim, was an inventor whose biggest competitor was Thomas Alva Edison. Edison won the patent for the first incandescent light bulb, but there was one problem. His light bulb did not stay lit for very long, and it needed a better filament. Hiram Maxim put Lewis to work on the problem, but Edison once again beat them to it, patenting the carbon filament first. But 2 years later, Lewis Latimer secured a patent for a faster and easier way to make the carbonized filaments that made light bulbs more affordable and long-lasting. Latimer became an expert in the new technology of electricity, and Hiram Maxim sent him to places like New York, Philadelphia, Montreal, and even London to help set up their first electricity systems. An unusual position for a black man at the time, and one that his colleagues did not always welcome him in. When Hiram Maxim retired in 1882, Latimer found work with the rival Edison Electric Company, where his expertise in patents and his self-taught ability to speak French and German were very useful in defending Edison's patents from challengers in both the US and internationally. Although Edison was always on the lookout for sharp minds, he most often hired white men. But in 1918, when top aides in Edison's company were assembled into a special group called the Edison Pioneers, Latimer was the only African-American member. Pictures right there. I could spend a long time telling you about Latimer's many accomplishments. In addition to being a draftsman, an inventor, an electrical engineer, and by the way, he invented a toilet that could be used on trains that were moving. Fun fact. He was also a painter, a musician, a published poet, and a playwright. But what we remember him most for was his commitment to trying to find ways to make life better for all people. He worked to improve the civil rights of African American citizens of the United States. He also helped to teach new immigrants mechanical engineering, drawing, and English. After he purchased a new home in the predominantly white neighborhood of Flushing, Queens, New York, he became a founding member of the Unitarian Church there, which still stands today. Despite all of his accomplishments, Lewis Latimer remained a humble man. We can see this in his self-portrait here. He drew this, which looks much like a drawing for a patent. In it, we do not see his face, and Latimer himself is shown as smaller than his mechanical pencil. This suggests that Latimer didn't see himself as important, but rather saw what he could do to help others as important.
This is the time we set aside for the offering in order to give toward the financial vitality of this community. Also, 25% of the undesignated collection each week goes to an organization in the community that we partner with. This week, it is Ripple of One. Each week, we also collect non-perishable food for the Clemson Community Cares Food Bank. You may also give by going to the UUFC website and using the donate button. There you will see options for paying your pledge and donating towards the organizations we partner with. Thank you for your generosity.
We now enter into a time of a different kind of generosity, a generosity of spirit, a sharing of our joys and concerns that we offer up each week, reminding us of our connection to this community, to one another, and that we are not alone. I've asked Karl to place a stone into this bowl representing our community that holds these joys and concerns here today. Have a joy from Tom Hiebel that my son Joseph's birthday yesterday. He is now 19 years old. Yes. We have a joy from Alan Goldsmith that it was great to see such a significant turnout at yesterday's Pendleton protest against Lindsey Graham for supporting Trump's now daily assault on democracy. And special kudos to Ellen Fu for getting out of her sickbed to be there with a hand-drawn sign and all. I think we had about a dozen people from UUFC that showed up at different times throughout the 4-hour span yesterday. Have note from John Hoskin that Sarah is in Texas learning to rehab bats and returns tomorrow. I miss her. Also, many thanks to Usama for upgrading our technology on Friday. And so we have a new digital mixer that allows for more ease in adjusting the sound quality. So we hope that people will be able to hear us better with less variance in this space and in our social hall and at home. So, yes, and thank you both to Usama and John for helping make sure that happened. Have a note from Nancy and Bing that welcome their daughter, Stacy. She just closed a show that includes 2 of her sculptures. We will have them in the library during social hour for those that are interested. Yes. And a joy from Kathy. Let's celebrate today's 7th anniversary of Abundant Love, which is a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Georgia. It's near Atlanta, right? Yeah, thank you. Oh, and that says it in the next line. This is Atlanta UU Church based on African American traditions. Gordon is there today and is helping with an accessibility ramp for Abundant Love's newly acquired building. Yes. And I would like to take a moment to just hold all that many are feeling as far as both fears and hope, whatever is holding you during this time. And to also lift up some of our beloveds from this congregation that are dealing with illness, recovery from surgery, or falls this week. And place one final stone representing all of the joys and concerns that remain quiet and tender upon our hearts this morning. Now invite you to sing our children out to their RE class with Kathy Crane and Karen Hiebel with Go Now in Peace.
The first reading, Building Respect with Reverend Joseph Jerden, 1842, 1901, by Janine K. Ghostmeyer. as was part of a virtue ethics and ethical development program for high school youth. When Joseph Jordan was born in Virginia in 1842, slavery was still legal. Joseph had been born free in a small community on the Elizabeth River. He learned to read and write. He married Indiana Brown, and they had 3 children and built a new life together. The Civil War had ended by now. Slavery was gone, and many other people also needed to build new lives. Even though people could no longer be bought and sold, true freedom had not yet arrived for African Americans. The laws were unfair, and it was hard for African Americans to find places to live, or good jobs, or schools of any kind. Joseph had become a Baptist minister, and when he preached on Sundays, he sometimes spoke
of who we are. Listen carefully. Can you still hear the song? The one sung for you when you were born. The song sung by the cosmos in motion, rejoicing at your life. You, the result. You, the outcome. You, the celebration. Listen carefully. Can you hear it still? A song of possibility, a reminder that we still have time to be who and what we need to be. Oh. It's a sneak peek of a video that's coming a little bit later that has some commonality to this prayer and meditation. The universe speaks to us in different ways sometimes and invites you to listen carefully to the vast expanse echoing as recognition that it's not always easy. Possibilities can be hard to pursue, roads not taken, wrong turns, destinations that disappoint. Though this, the song, persists, the universe sings no less, because time and space wear us thin. The music calls us to recognize our limitations, to recognize that song is best sung with others. Here, in this community, bring alive the most primordial and original impulse, the desire to sing to the universe who we are, to celebrate and share our lives with others.
We Were Always Here by Connie Simon. As I knew UU in Philadelphia, I'd walk through the church doors every Sunday and see a portrait of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. I'd known of her only as a writer. Before 2009, I had no idea that she was a Unitarian and a member of my home congregation. When someone lists Unitarians or Universalists, they usually name men from the 19th century: Channing, Parker, Thoreau, and maybe Ballou. Never anyone black like me. Maybe that's why I was stunned when, at a recent visit to a congregation, a member came up to me and shared their understanding that Unitarian Universalism is a relatively new religion. And they learned it was started by James Reed on his trip down south in 1965. I was too stunned in the moment to even process that or ask who had even taught him that. Even if it was a misunderstanding, it's a telling one. The assumption that our faith arose from a white founder. I used to teach a UU history class for one of our regions, and I would always ask participants if they were aware that a person from Africa was one of the first proponents of Unitarian theology. No, they would say, that's not possible. Arius was a religious leader born in Libya, northern Africa, who argued against the Trinitarian view that God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit were one. If the Father begot the Son, then he who was begotten had a beginning in existence. And from this it follows there was a time when the Son was not. He was declared a heretic at the Council of Nicaea in 325 Common Era, a bit before James Reed. While some white UUs would prefer to think that Arius is a European, the fact is that this black ancestor has shaped our faith for nearly 2,000 years. A piece of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning includes being responsible in how you partake of the stories of others. For example, are you considering all the stories? It's not responsible to say that people who look like me weren't part of this tradition, because we were. As I heard the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed say years ago, we were always here.
Thank you, Karl. So I want to preface this video for a moment. If you look at your order of service, you might notice that we are listed twice, once as the video and then once as our closing hymn. So this video shows the UU choir from General Assembly in 2020, led by Yazzie Barnwell, who is a Unitarian Universalist. And so this video might sound a little bit different because it is a choir with a song leader in it, but it'll give you a good idea of what it will sound like when you are invited to sing here in this space as our closing hymn. I'd also like to ask somebody at the back if they would flip on the fans. I've seen a lot of people waving things to cool off. There's 4 switches at the back that aren't flipped up that control the fans. All right, thank you, and we're ready for the video now.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for
So in recent weeks, y'all might have noticed that I've not liked to stand behind the pulpit to give my sermon, now that I have this head-worn mic. But today I have a few more notes and quotes that I want to look at, so we're going to try it with just this stand in front of me, and hopefully I have not lost my notes. Okay. Technology. It is wonderful, and it is a crutch sometimes. So this week, I wanted to lift up Black Unitarians, Universalists, and Unitarian Universalists because it is Black History Month after all. And I'm a bit of a history nerd. My undergrad is in history, and I worked in giving tours at history museums for a decade. So I'm going to try not to make this just like a history report, though. Why does it matter to us as Unitarian Universalists to know about our ancestors? Those that have helped shape who we are and who we are becoming. And while I think it's important for us to celebrate our Black Unitarian Universalist and UU ancestors throughout the year, in light of saying we're not going to celebrate Black History Month, at least from our federal government officials, I think it's even more important to lift it up here today to honor the celebration of this month. Banning different segments of our history is not something new. When I was living in Florida, I was there while they had the Don't Say Gay bill and banning of AP, or advanced placement, African American studies classes. Not wanting to talk about the history in a more complex way. And as many of you know, we have book bannings that are going on here locally in this state, in our counties. And we have some folks here that help in resistance to that through our social action committee. So just if you feel comfortable doing so, does anybody here in this room participate in CAFE or Women's League of Voters or social action working with book banning topic? A couple of folks here, Modi and Teresa? Okay. Sometimes I do really good with remembering names without name tags visible, and then sometimes I struggle just a little bit more. But we also have folks like Holly Ulbrich, Michael Cole, who aren't here in the space with us this morning, as well as Gordon Crane. And Gordon Crane actually has just accepted a leadership position for CAFE of Oconee County, and CAFE stands for Community Advocates for Education. And they played a role in the demonstration in Pendleton yesterday as well, wanting to continue to be a presence in this community that is pushing back against these book bans and against censorship in these ways. But today I wanted to lift up some of our religious ancestors, our history as UUs. You heard about Lewis Latimer from The Time for All Ages and about Joseph Jordan from Karl's reading. And that Arius, one of the earliest people we can claim as a Unitarian ancestor, as part of our Black pioneers in our denomination. And I left my book up here instead of grabbing it to bring down here with me, but if you're interested, there's a couple of books that I pulled information from today that are both by the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, one titled Black Pioneers in White Denomination, and the other titled Darkening the Doorways, Black Trailblazers and Missed Opportunities in Unitarian Universalism. I also have a pretty extensive 7-page timeline of U racial diversity from 1784 to 2001 that I pulled from. And there's so much more history than what I'm going to lift up in my short sermon today. But I invite you to hang in with me for a second. How many of you know that as UUs, we early on, Unitarians and Universalists were involved in abolition movement? Good number of you. So this was also a context that I could talk a lot about in a different way, but rather than focusing on the white people in our denomination doing anti-racism work, I want to lift up people of color. In 1785, Gloucester Dalton, an African American, was one of the signers of a compact of Gloucester Universalist Society. All the way back in 1785. However, it wasn't until 1870 that Meadville Theological School admitted its first African-American student. Then, as noted in the first reading, Joseph Jordan was the first ordained African-American Universalist minister who started the mission school in Norfolk, Virginia. And he was followed by Thomas Wise, who is also mentioned in the story, and then really confusingly, Joseph Fletcher Jordan. And Jordan's name is spelled Jordan, but pronounced Jarden. So we have Joseph Jordan, or Jordan, and then Joseph Jordan, who was ordained in 1904. However, on the Unitarian side of things, we struggled a little bit more. Ethel Brown was the 7th black man to attend Meadville, but he was the first to be avowed Unitarian and was later ordained in 1912, before he returned to Jamaica to start a mission and building a Unitarian congregation. Now, the American Unitarian Association committed 3 years of funding. But then, halfway through, they decided that his efforts weren't satisfactory and withdrew funding. He continued to struggle to get support from the UUA, even moved to the United States and tried his hand at beginning a Unitarian church here. There's a couple of quotes that I want to share from Mark Morrison Reed's book. He said, quote, "I have cited at length Brown's depiction of these events because racial attitudes Brown encountered in Eliot and Lewis Cornish, the secretary of the American Unitarian Association, posed very real obstacles to Brown. Their view of blacks was so limited that they never seriously believed that Unitarianism could be grasped by them. This attitude undermined Brown's mission from the outset." Later, he notes of another piece reflecting on Brown by Belgrave that it was indicative of the extent of his racial prejudice was his recommendation that the work in Jamaica be viewed as a more genuine humanitarian act than a mission. He appealed to Unitarians who were more interested in social uplift effort rather than religious work. He seemed to be less concerned with blacks becoming Unitarians than them becoming more civilized, end quote. When Louis McGee approached Curtis Reese in 1927 about becoming a Unitarian minister, he said, if you can be a Unitarian, you better bring your own congregation. Now, of course, in 1920s, there was still so much segregation. And the idea that a black minister would head up a mostly white congregation or that they would manage to have an integrated congregation was largely unheard of. Lewis was ordained in 1948, and in 1961, he was appointed a call to Chico Unitarian Fellowship in California as the first minister to a predominantly white congregation. And now we continue to be a predominantly white Protestant model of church. And we don't claim to be Protestant, do we? But we still follow that model quite closely in some ways. But I want to come back to that in a minute. So, did any of y'all know that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at General Assembly's special Ware lecture in 1966? A few of you, yes. So, at the Ware lecture, we invite people from the community. There's a long list of names, including Howard Thurman and, oh God, there's so many over the years. But Dr. King spoke to UUs about not sleeping through the revolution. It was an important message for us to hear then, and can still be an important message for us to hear now as Unitarian Universalist. King expressed an affinity for Unitarianism. His wife, Coretta, later mentioned this in a conversation with, I think it was Natalie Fenimore, I don't have it in my notes, but a Unitarian Universalist, and said that he had a strong love and affinity for Unitarianism, but didn't think that he could do the critical work of the civil rights movement within our predominantly white denomination. To me, one of the saddest things is, 2 years later, there was a controversy that arose in Unitarian Universalism. In 1968, a group called the Black Affairs Council was formed, as well as the Black and White Action Council. When they were both put in place, there was some tension there. The UUA made a commitment to the Black Affairs Council for funding in the amount of $1 million. But due to the tension between these two groups, the UUA removed that funding, or at least a large portion of it. Of course, they cited some financial issues in the denomination as part of their reasoning as well, which isn't completely untrue, but in context, it's a bit. As a result of this conflict, members of the Black Affairs Council in 1969 walked out of General Assembly. Many of them never came back. We've seen trends over time where we've worked through and worked towards more integration and greater representation. In 1992, the Office for Racial and Cultural Diversity was established, and just a few years later, the Diverse and Revolutionary UU Multicultural Ministries was established to help continue to move this work forward in our denomination. With the election of Reverend William J. Sinkford in 2001, we had our first Black Unitarian Universalist Association president. And more recently, in 2023, Reverend Dr. Sophia Bedencourt as the first Black Indigenous woman to serve in that role. But I want to back up couple of years again and talk about Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. How many of you heard of this group? Okay, I think one hand in this room at least. Well, they are a group that started after the Black Lives Matter movement and movement for Black Lives, and it's an organization that creates space for Black Unitarian Universalists to feel supported and to have more embodied worship. So you remember I said we still follow that very Protestant white church model. We don't do embodied worship very much. I've tried to get us moving around a little bit more, but I want to explicitly say this today, okay? I don't mind if you move around, whether it is to music or to something I say. If you want to clap or snap, or you have fidget toys, or you're knitting, or you want to get up and stretch and move around, or heaven forbid you raise your hand and want to ask a question. So this is just a little off topic, but my favorite moment in my congregation in Tallahassee was that I had a little boy in this multi-generational service that I was speaking about planting seeds and talking about how people that founded that congregation had planted seeds. And he raises his hand, he's the first time, second time there, and goes, "Do you mean you really planted this building as a seed?" I loved that so much. And so if we get interrupted or get off topic a little bit, I'm okay with that. I want us to feel something a little bit more in our UU spaces. And that is something that we can learn and be enriched by the diversity that is present in our denomination. And one of my first times attending General Assembly in 2016, there were a few things that happened that kind of represent our goal in working towards this diversity. It was announced that we had financially supported Black Lives of UU, which is also called Blue. And have y'all ever seen people that kind of are cheering about themselves, like they're kind of patting themselves on the back? Well, that was the feeling in that space. But we had just started. We just said, hey, we're going to support you financially, but we've got a habit of not upholding that support. So we were just starting. It was a little bit premature as our celebration. There were a few other things that happened. The other one that I wanted to lift up is the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber was scheduled to speak as an action of immediate witness at the steps of the Ohio State House. And there was a small threat of rain. And because there was a small threat of rain, they decided to move it in. It became more like a lecture. And again, that self-congratulatory that we're doing this thing. This was the first time that I met Alondria Williams, and Alondria used E as their pronoun rather than typical pronouns. But I met E then, and they later became co-moderators for GA. During this initial meeting, Alondria was speaking with some other Black UUs in attendance, and they said that it felt more like a lecture and didn't know why we were still doing it if we weren't doing it out in public. As a denomination, we have benefited so greatly from the rich diversity that is present, but we don't always make space for inclusion, not just diversity, not just wanting our numbers represented of more people of color in our congregations, but to be truly inclusive and welcoming to people of a diverse background that experience and want to experience worship and programming in different ways. And I'm realizing I'm running long, so I hope y'all just bear with me for a few minutes longer. In 2020, the Commission on Institutional Change published Widening the Circle of Concern, giving us examples of how we could do this better. And then a couple of years later, the Common Read, if any of y'all are familiar, every year the UUA says that there's a particular book that is going to be a common read for the denomination and offers study guides and way to participate in that. And I'm wondering if y'all did one for 2022-2023's Mistakes and Miracles. Anybody remember that one? Yes, okay. So it's talking about congregations on the road to multiculturalism. And there is something in there that just stands out in my brain. One of the congregations talked about stumbling on the road to multiculturalism, but they said, at least we're stumbling in the right direction. I hope that we are stumbling in the right direction, working towards greater inclusivity, not just diversity, because we are truly enriched by that diversity. Which is why I want to circle back to where I began. Working against book banning, working to make sure our history is being told, that we are talking about Black history, that we are talking about history of different people that are being demonized and targeted in our country right now. The beauty of our being part of a living tradition is that we know it is so important for us to not be fixed in stone, that we have the ability to learn and change and grow together. And a statement that you've probably heard me say a lot before is, when we know better, we can do better. I hope that we can continue to recognize the beauty and the diversity of our faith, of people that have been here from the beginning, that their voices, their presence matters, and that we can show up in ways of supporting this in our communities. I hope that you find some meaning in some of the history, and it not just sound like a history lesson. I try not to do this too often. But I hope that you find meaning in this history and that it inspires creation and action in the world. May it be so. May we make it so. And blessed be. I'd like to now invite you to rise in body, mind, or spirit, wherever you are, to sing number 1051, which is in the teal hymnal and will be on the slides for We Are, which we heard the video of just a little while ago. Thank y'all for trying that out. May we know that we are part of the song of the universe, that our ancestors are many and diverse, that have helped create and shape who we are. May you carry forth who we are into the world as you go in peace and return in love.